and good evening. This is the Nightmares with myself, Rhett Gardner,
And myself, Becca Connor.
and this is a brand new week of similar subject matter that we talked about previously. How have you been in the last week, B? Because it almost sounds like we did the recording only an hour ago.
Wow, yes, it certainly feels like we did the recording only an hour ago. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't.
Ooh.
Who knows? Doo doo doo. Oh god, we've got to stop.
Yeah, we were having in between episodes we kind of just lost it momentarily.
Yeah.
And when I said momentarily, we had no reign over ourselves in any shape or form. It's quite. I'm surprised we're composed now, but it's already, I can already be feeling.
It's. I'm gonna be honest. I have Rat Race prepped for after we record
Oh yeah,
this
we're talking.
on my TV. I'm ready to
Me
go.
too. I'm so excited. Yeah, we were talking about Rat Race in between. If you haven't seen that, you haven't lived. If you have Amazon Prime, go watch Rat Race
Go
right now.
watch it now.
Has the
Mm-hmm.
best casting, the best story, it has the best comedy, it has the best band in the world at the end of it, Smash Mouth. Um,
It's got everyone. It's got Whoopi Goldberg. Got John Cleese. It's got, like, you name
Br-
it, they're probably in there in a minor role. You'll never know.
Rowan Atkinson, Breckin Myers,
Yes.
John Lovitz, all these
Cuba
dudes.
Gooding Jr.,
Yeah, Cuba Gooding
Seth
Jr.
Green,
Yeah, oh my
mm-hmm.
god, such a great.
Wayne Knight, Paul Rodriguez. Like, the cast is amazing. This is not horror at
No,
all, but I'm so excited to talk about it.
the true horror is people having to listen to this at the beginning. Like, what? This is like, is this how they're going to start a horror podcast? Yes.
This is, because we're going to go into something really dark and serious now. Our next two
Oh,
movies
yeah,
are quite grim.
yeah,
So yeah, we're gonna start lighthearted. I'm looking forward to Rat Race after this.
yeah,
But in the meantime, we're gonna talk about some pretty scary stuff. So
yeah. In fact,
maybe a bit.
pause the podcast now. Go watch Rat Race, and then
And
come
then come
back.
back.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
if it gets, I mean, last episode was pretty grim, especially at the beginning. So I
I'm
understand
gonna
that.
be honest. I think
Yeah.
this one is going to be worse.
Yeah.
Not worse, but I think this is gonna be darker
Yeah,
because
it's gonna be dark.
last episode was kind of the introduction to the found footage genre. We kind of did an overview,
Yeah.
but for this one, we're taking an in-depth look at two films. I know that you wanted to talk about Lake Mungo, which I haven't seen. I'm loath to say, but I've done a little bit of research on, and Poughkeepsie tapes.
Oh,
Which,
perhaps one of my
like that.
one of my all-time favorite horror films is that.
One of the reasons I'm currently not sleeping.
Yeah, that's why she has Rat Race as a therapy now. She just watches it like whenever she has like a bad moment with that film. She just watches Rat Race to get to
I
come
do.
through it.
I'm gonna be honest. That's why watching the Poughkeepsie tapes took me like 7 hours because I had to pause every
Yeah.
10 minutes to watch Rat
Okay,
Race.
so let me do the let me just wind it back a little and then go through a little explanation. But I just want to say it one last time. Get out of the way. Rat Race.
Go for it. 100%.
All right.
Rat Race. If you haven't seen it, you haven't lived.
Yeah, and honestly, I would recommend watching this before, during podcast, after, all three at once. Just go and do it now.
Have it on in the background.
Have it on the back.
Have it on in the background.
Have it on in the background. Yeah.
It'll be the weirdest thing you'll listen to all week. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. If you could name a weirder experience, we'll be here waiting for you. All right. Let's be serious. Okay. So in the last episode, if you haven't listened, we discussed about the found footage subgenre of horror. Just to recap again, basically, it's a use of footage that was found by someone else in a movie, and they edited it to form sort of a narrative to find out what happened during the filming of those tapes. It's a very popular genre. It started off pretty grim in the early 80s with two films that were kind of obscure if you'd never heard about them before. And then a few years later, in the late 90s, the Blair Witch Project came out, which we've already discussed. Another example of how a very minimalist approach can be one of the most popular and also one of the highest grossing horror films of all time. So in part two, we're going to go skip a few years because unfortunately there are large gaps in the timeline. We are going to go to 2007. Now, me personally, I don't remember 2007 too well in terms of horror films, but if you look back on the timeline of when horror, like found footage films were being made, this is the year where it really flourished. So, for example, the two films that we're particularly going to be talking about is Lake Mundo and the Poughkeepsie tapes. But alongside those films, I'm just looking into it now. I can't remember the top of my head. REC was one of them, which is also another famous film. It was the first Paranormal Activity film came out then, and we all know how well that did. And I don't mind those films actually. I think they're really good. They actually show, because it's supernatural horror with the found footage. They did it in a very interesting sort of way. So I highly recommend those movies as well. And I think as a franchise, I could probably do a separate episode on them. But I really recommend at least the first few. Even if they're all bad, they're still really good. What else was there? There was quite a few films that came out that year. I mean, the year after that, Cloverfield came out, which was another massive hit. That was more of a monster movie, really, than a horror. But in this year, two of what I believe to be the gems of modern day found footage, like post Blair Witch, is Poughkeepsie tapes and Lake Mungo. So we're going through the Poughkeepsie tapes first, and that was directed by John Eric Dowdle, tongue tied. Yeah. So he's actually made quite a few very relatively popular found footage horror films. I think most of his most of his films are found footage, except for Devil, which was actually produced by M. Night Shyamalan, and it had that sort of approach where there was like a twist at the end. That kind of film. I saw Devil before; it wasn't really my thing, but he also did As Above, So Below, which was a French found footage horror film based on the catacombs, the French catacombs with skulls in them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's a really good film, and that might, because I have an idea of wanting to do like world cinema, so maybe we could do like a French horror film podcast, and that could be one of them.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're coming up with ideas on the spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one that we could do then. But now we're just going to talk about this film. So it's another found footage, sort of like a pseudo documentary, where it starts off with a police raid in Poughkeepsie, New York, and basically they got a tip that a very infamous serial killer was kind of set up base there, and they found nothing in that house with the exception of 800 videotapes made by a serial killer known as Edward Carver. So the film itself talks about what's on those tapes, and it categorizes sort of the timeline of the killer, like going from his first killings into how he morphed into a more professional killer, and some of the events that came from his killings, and also about a particular person who was one of his more infamous victims. Now, another thing about this movie, and the reason in the last episode, if you didn't remember, so one of the things I said that I believe that made the Blair Witch so successful as a film is because of the minimalist approach and the idea of realism. Yeah. And I think those really apply here. So everything was done as a pseudo documentary, and although it's much gorier than in the Blair Witch, there wasn't that much blood, there wasn't that much gore. I think it was
definitely interesting in how they displayed a lot of those scenes, though.
Oh,
but we'll go into that
later.
later.
So for me, I find the actual performance of the killer, who we only see through these videotapes, was just vastly interesting. And in fact, him as a person is so extraordinarily interesting, that alone is just like a reason to watch the film. But there's a million reasons why this film is just so good, and we're going to do our very best to kind of dissect that. So what I loved about the film is just, again, how authentic they attempted in which to make it. So, for example, there's a lot of interviews evolved around the killer himself. So in the beginning of the film, where they find the videotapes, we get an interview with this guy who archives who had to watch all of these videotapes and archive them, and timestamp them and things like that. So he had to go through them all, and he was just talking about how there's just just to get a glimpse of how weird this killer was before we even get into the killings, before we even get into the history. The thing that the guy mentions is there is hundreds of hours of footage of balloons. Yeah, balloons.
Yeah.
That is so weird. The first tape that we see is this woman who's been asked by the killer to sit on top of a giant balloon.
Yeah, she blows it up, and then she's got to sit and bounce on it.
Yeah, she has to sit and bounce on it and pop it. But what was scary about the film already is the way the guy shouts at her. It's like, pop it! It just came out of left field. It was terrifying already. And this is
you see kind of his unhinged side very, very quickly.
Oh, yeah. It's just an interesting way to introduce the character, because the way the film starts is the actual raid. So this guy, we're going into this guy's house, we find these videotapes, it turns out he's a killer, and the first thing we find out is he has this weird balloon fetish. And already, you just think, well, who the fuck is this guy? You know what I mean? We don't even... It's just such an interesting way to introduce a killer. Normally, the approach would be, we'd see him at the very beginning, they've gone through something in their life and they kill someone, and then they start forming, these patterns and continuing to kill people. But that's, you just start off with balloons. For me, it's just an interesting approach. That's all I'm gonna say. And then from there on, we categorize. We see the history of trying to decipher, the killer himself. Going through the history. So the very first section is his first kill.
Yeah.
And
which is unnerving, to say the
already
least.
Yeah, or I mean, if the balloons didn't unnerve you, this definitely is the nail on the coffin there.
The balloons I was more kind of amused. I was like, okay, this is... I feel like with the Poughkeepsie tapes, there was almost a comical twist on a lot of things that were done.
Yeah.
Especially with regards to some of the interviews. You've got some really dark, creepy, unsettling stuff going on. And then they have one of the titles on the screen was the dismemberment expert, later on in the film. So you've got a weird little comparison between the two.
Yeah, I see.
You have dark and creepy, and you have little comedy moments. So the balloons, while yes unnerving, I feel was more an interesting and kind of scary, but dark, comical kind of scary.
Yeah,
the victim in the beginning.
I think,
well, not the victim, the villain in the beginning.
Yeah, and for me, I just thought of it now. I think it kills any preconceptions you have on the killer, because at this point in history, we've probably got so much knowledge on several serial killers throughout the years. There's a lot of smart Alex who think they know so much, and then they see something like that, and already they're lost. They have no idea what's in store for them.
especially as like throughout the rest of it, it's never really explained like why he does what he does. It's hinted at, like, oh, we think that a fight happened, or oh, we think that something bad must have set him off and he was led down this train of thought. But there is the possibility that he's always been like this, and that he's just an unhinged madman who has a fucking thing for balloons.
For balloons, yeah. It's a great introduction on the podcast that, this guy likes balloons and he likes murder. So put the two and two together.
That's his whole MO. Balloons, murder.
It's his modus operandi.
There's nothing more to say about this.
Movie. All right, podcast done. All right, see you guys later. Let's go watch Rat Race.
You know that's what I'm like working
I know,
up to the whole way through. Let's go, Rat Race. But no, I really enjoyed Poughkeepsie. Even if I did find a lot of the way through when it got to the more grim stuff, I found myself like stopping and being like, oh, okay, we're gonna take a minute before we carry on.
Yeah, I mean, for example, just going back to the first bit is where we see his first kill, which is so he has like a camcorder and he's like he's not very good with it. He's probably just had it for the first time, and he approaches a stranger's house, like in front of a property, and there's a young girl that's just kind of playing on her own out in the garden, and he's like talking to her, and she's getting a bit nervous, and of course like he's just like, hey, do you want to see like what it's like filming the camera in, and puts it close to her face. You don't see anything. It's all and you just hear a thump, a body drops, and he starts to run away, and that was like the first kill. And again, there's no gore. You don't see anything on screen. But the noise was so loud in your head. And I always watch horror films with headphones because I want to get as much realness.
I made that mistake the first time.
Yeah, well. It's quite scary. I mean, you can hear that thump right in your brain, and it's just...
It's so visceral.
Yeah.
Like, you don't just hear it, you feel it. It's...
And what makes it even... Yeah, it's fine. What makes it more real is they interview the parents afterwards, after that scene, and it turns out that the child was raped as well as murdered, which is very... And there's a lot of strong themes in this film, although it's not as it's not like Cannibal Holocaust, which I mentioned in the previous episode. Please be warned, there's a lot of like snuff sensibilities in this film, and none of it's real, but a lot of the footage was snuff films basically, which we only see glimpses of, but it is there. It is quite grim in its subject matter, so it's not for the faint of heart. This is just one of those. This is at the very beginning of the film, as well. And as we go on throughout the film, we see that through his videotapes, that the killer is becoming more and more meticulous, more prepared, and unfortunately, in some ways, more creative. So in the first... And what's really interesting is we see him grow as a murderer through his footage. So in the first one, he was kind of clumsy with the camera. You can see he was clumsy with his murder. I think he just wanted kind of just... It was just kind of building inside of him, and he wanted to act out on it, and he finally did, and kind of freaked out. But in the second one, he's a bit more meticulous with his the use of his camera, and he's more good at kind of creating an identity on the spot, so to speak. So, for example, he speaks to a couple. He convinces them to give him a ride, and then he tells them to go into this location, which is like an abandoned area in the middle of nowhere. He clubs the guy, and the woman who was driving, he chloroforms her. But what was interesting, and the archive guy from the FBI mentioned this as well, is the way he positioned the camera, and also the way he chloroformed the woman. Like that, he must have practiced that like several times in order to get that right. So
I think also what added to that scene as well is that they have the same guy obviously they have the actor for Edward Carver performing all of this as it goes through, and you can see as these scenes are being played out, he himself is getting more confident in his use with the camera,
which
adds to like a depth of realism to it.
Yeah, exactly. And with the interviews perceptions as well, because of course we never get to hear from the killer's perspective, we only hear it through interviews. So that makes it even more interesting about this guy, is that we can't quite, the only thing we know about him is through the tapes and what people say about him. So we're kind of dependent on the footage, and although it's sickening, you want to know more and you want to see more, because that's the only way you're going to know more. So it's like this urgency.
Yeah, it does. It definitely grips you. It grips you to the point that you can't look away, and when you do, it's kind of like a sense of, oh god, I need to look back because I need to know what happens. Sadly, I need to know the resolve of the situation.
I mean, and even afterwards, like, he gets more creative, like I said. So what happened to that woman is she wakes up, and actually no, it's not the same woman, sorry, but one of the victims, so basically because he's quite a smug sort of killer, like most of them are. He was actually found on CCTV in a gas station giving sign language to the camera to reveal locations of the bodies. And one of the bodies they found was a woman that had a cesarean section, with a severed head of a husband inside a room
in her body.
Yeah, and he sewed her up. Yeah, and filmed her reaction.
She woke up to that.
Yeah, she woke up to that.
Yeah.
And he filmed the reaction because I guess he just wanted to see the expression on her face. Perhaps that's my theory. And in fact, a lot throughout the film, he does a lot of theatrics as well. Like, he would wear masks and capes. So for me, I feel like these are like performance footages in a way. Like, to him, this is art, I think, like performance art, and that's why he's filming all these things, because it's like real emotion. That's my theory anyway. I don't think they go into that, but I think when you see the way he acts and how he is with people, I think, like, to him, could be a form of art, which I imagine perhaps a lot of killers would see it that way as well. Like, this is their expression, albeit very extreme. And what's really fascinating is like the interviews with the FBI people. So there's this one guy who's been working for the FBI for like several years. He's kind of like a recruitment guy, and I remember him talking, like, he was saying, like, he's been on the job for like 20 years and he's never seen anything like this. And he was in a classroom with a bunch of people that want to get into the FBI, and he tells them, like, at least 3 of you are going to go home and saying this is not the job for you. Like, there are a lot of sick people out there in the world, and, you know, it's their job to kind of, you know, to be a part of that in a way, to kind of immerse themselves in the lunacy of these killers, and like, and be subjected to the horrible things that they do. And in that classroom, they showed one of the Poughkeepsie tapes, and although you don't get to see the whole thing, you can see the reactions from the people, and it's just, you know, it's just really, it just tells you how grim these tapes are. In fact, the archive guy I mentioned at the beginning, he said that he brought it home to work one evening so he could continue his research.
Yes, and his wife ended up watching it
for like 30 minutes.
Or like part of it.
Yeah, and she wouldn't let him touch her for at least a year just to get over it.
Yeah.
So that's the level. I mean, that's like, and sometimes when you build things up, they don't live up to the hype. I can't think of a better word to say, but then you see some of these tapes directly, and it's it's very grim. In fact, the next one I'm going to talk about, and perhaps it's one of the biggest parts of the whole film, is Cheryl Dempsey. So
Yes.
yeah,
Her story is tragic.
her story is really tragic. So she had, she had a very good life. She had a boyfriend. I think, she may have been a student, and Carver, the killer, kind of stalked her for an unspecified amount of time. Went into her house, stayed there until he was ready, killed her boyfriend, and kidnapped her. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. In the footage that we've seen, she was abused in a number of ways, and you can see like how she was at the beginning. Like, she was just this really happy sort of person, and then you can see her being slowly destroyed as a human being over time, like as her human rights were taken away, and like the sexual and physical and psychological abuse she had to endure, and what was really creepy is the killer went to see her mother.
Her mother,
yeah,
wasn't it?
that was horrible. And she wasn't able to do anything. She kind of just, as soon as she realized, he started laughing and then just like fled. He had the camera to film a reaction as well, you see, and it was really horrible. So I don't know how else to say it. Like, she becomes like a sidekick almost, in a way. Like almost like a lover, which is really weird to say, but you see that in the film. Like, it's kind of like cabin fever, I guess. I think, or no, not cabin fever. It's a syndrome. It's a syndrome. I can't think of
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, Stockholm syndrome, where you've kind of
it is actually a terrifyingly good portrayal of it. Of Stockholm syndrome, and how situations can arise where someone has been abused and they eventually end up thinking, no, I'm the one at fault, or this is happening because of something I've done, when it's not actually their fault.
Yeah.
So,
and
it's a terrifyingly interesting and good portrayal of Stockholm syndrome.
Absolutely, yeah. It's probably one of the more, I mean, I wouldn't say accurate because I wouldn't know. I've never been in that situation or known anyone who ever has. But I suppose it's a very good portrayal of that, as you mentioned. And throughout the film, she's featured in quite a few of the tapes, and you can see how much damage and how much harm. Yeah, it's like night and day, and it's really, really, it's really hard to watch. I mean, again, it's all acting. None of this is real, but they did such a good job with doing that realism. I don't know so much about behind the scenes. I don't know how much is improv. I don't know how much is scripted.
From what I saw, there was like a lot of room for improv, but one of the biggest things maybe to mention is that the lady that played Catherine is the wife of the director.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I think as well that, I'm just trying to think.
When you say Catherine, do you mean Cheryl?
Cheryl, sorry.
I was like, who the hell's Catherine?
Sorry.
This is like.
That's a very good question. I don't know. I had crossed wires.
That's all right.
For a moment.
That's okay.
Stacey Chbosky as the actress.
Yeah.
And she's the wife of the director, so I think that also contributed phenomenally to her performance as well.
Yeah, that
maybe
could be
like personal coaching.
A lot of trust, because to be honest, like, that's gonna. I can't. What I think is, like, how the hell can they put themselves in that mindset while they're filming? I know it's not real, but to like. But man, their acting must be really good, because in the Blair Witch they've explained how they did some of the stuff, and a lot of the time, the tension of the cast was purely made by how real their situation was in, and it was actually caught real on tape.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about this film, the trivia behind it. So I don't know if it was improv, but the acting is very good. Like really, really good. So maybe it was just fortunate that it just worked out that way. Um, I would need to kind of look into that a bit more myself. But yeah, that plays a lot, and I find with the tapes, some of the tapes, there's like hardly any editing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just like most of them were one takes, which made it even more creepy.
Yeah, because it adds to the fact that it's plausibly real.
Oh, it's absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the most horrible scenes is where he pretends to be a policeman, and he picks up a British sounding woman, and he like during the drive he was like, so why did you like? I think what did he say? It's like, why did you think I was a policeman? He started freaking her out, and then he started like creeping her out, and she was like, "Please tell me you're joking." It's like, "I'm not joking. Like, you shouldn't get in cars with strangers." Like, almost mocking her. Like, it's almost as if she put herself in that position. And then in the tapes, we find her like kind of bound and like gagged with tape, and there's a space on the left hand side where it's like kind of the corner of a basement or something, and you start seeing him crawling on fours with like a mask on the top of his head. So when he's on all fours, it looks like his face.
Oh God!
Yeah, and he started like
awful.
slowly, just like crawling on all fours. It was,
Yeah.
and then he disappears out of view for a few seconds, and then his head just slowly creeps up against the woman. Oh God, it's horrible. It's nerve wracking. I mean,
that was the bit with the scissors, wasn't it?
yeah, and then like putting it in her neck, and then like her mouth started like bleeding. So because she was gagged, she was like choking on her own blood. It was so horrible. I mean, that's what I mean. Like he has, like the killer seems to have a lot of theatrical attributes in his films as well. So,
he's very creative. I'll give him that.
Yeah,
much.
I think that's what makes the film is not just his level of meticulous killing; it's the creativity behind it. I don't. Again, like I don't know how much of this, like this script is. If it's all scripted, it was very well done. I'll put it that way because it's really hard to capture that kind of realism unless some of it is actually happening to the people. Like I said, Blair Witch Project, another example. But it just happens to be very, very real. And then later down the line, we find out that he's changing his modus operandi, like his method of killing, which makes it even harder to find him. And eventually they're finding all of his bodies, and they think they find him, and then
but they don't. And
they wrongly accuse,
and they execute the wrong guy. That's the worst.
They execute the wrong guy, and
that's not the worst bit. But
the worst bit is he was found innocent, but the day that it happened was September 11th, when he attacks on Twin Towers.
3 days after he was.
3 days after. Yeah, so. Which is interesting how they bring the real events into it. So the sun was on there, and I don't know about you, but the sun looks like bloody Tim Burton, like the director in his younger days. It's really weird. I thought it was Tim Burton at first, or like a really young Alice Cooper. But yeah, anyway, I remember him talking about it. It was like, yeah, like his father was innocent, and nobody knows because of September 11. You know what I mean? Like he gets stopped in the streets because people recognize him as the son of the Water Street Butcher, which was the name that Carver was given at the time. And then so I think like after that, I think there was some period of time, and then another murder occurred, and eventually the police find a house, which I don't know if it's the same time they found the tapes. But that's where they find Cheryl, who's just left abandoned.
It is where they find the tapes.
Yeah, it is at the same time. Okay.
It is, yeah.
So and then we find Cheryl, and then we kind of see the fruits of his labor shall we say. Like she gets, I don't know why they would do this, and it's kind of horrible really to do this, but they interviewed her after she was checked out, and you can see like you can see the psychological damage it's done to her, and also physically as well. For example, when she goes to scratch her forehead, like left hand is missing. So that must have been
Yeah.
cut off or something, or she did it to herself because apparently she's been self harming in secret. And then she
Yeah.
talks about the kid when asked about Edward Carver, the killer, and she's talking about how like he loves her and
He loves her.
never really
Yeah.
leave her, and then he's gonna come back for her. And you start off like thinking like how she was kidnapped, and then over time she's become this completely different person who seems to really depend on someone because she didn't have anything else. Like all she had was him, and
Yeah.
um, complete. And because she could only depend on him, she had to be completely broken down and rebuilt. Um,
But that's where that whole Stockholm syndrome thing comes in to play
yeah.
usually, and also like reliance on an abuser. There's like a very very sad undertone there that is very prevalent in the real world.
Which I think what's good about this film is the amount of things that it touches on.
Yeah.
And it's like for example, the dad that was wrongly executed, who, and then we go through the son's life and how he like because justice like he was never found. Well, he was found innocent, but no one really knew, and it got completely swept over, and he's kind of living his life, you know, as the son of a killer, and it really affected him. And also like just seeing like talking to the victims, like so the like the little girl that died at the beginning, like we spoke, like we get to hear from a family, and you know what I mean. And she like during the recording, like the mother just burst into tears and stuff like that. It just makes it so real that the acting was so good.
But I would actually preface that the acting wasn't good,
Well, okay,
and that's what made it
made it
more
real.
believable. That's what made it
That's
real
what I mean, I
because
guess.
you
Yeah,
have people it's a clumsy put together of how they're feeling. It's a clumsy put together of how officers behave, but because it's clumsy, it feels more authentic. In that you won't have a cop stand up in front of a camera and prattle on about details of a case with
yeah,
perfect demeanor and perfect language for that situation. And when interviewing the parents of a deceased child, you're not going to have stability. You're going to have more than likely someone who's very nervous and very scared and very upset. And because of that, and maybe there aren't a lot of big names in this movie, and I think that works in its favor
absolutely,
hugely
absolutely.
because of the potential lack of experience. You have a more organic performance. You have people who don't know how to behave 100% in front of a camera in this setting, and so when they do behave, you are getting panic, which works really well for this kind of film.
Yeah, no, okay, that's a better way of putting it. Yeah, so what I mean is, so what I meant was sorry was the lack of acting, and I suppose, and again took a leaf out of Blair Witch Project, people who've completely inexperienced, and there you go. But although the situation, like in terms of filming it, it again I don't know too much about behind the scenes, but yeah, so I think it just added to that realism as well, which again was a follow up of the Blair Witch Project. In fact, what was a really good like the reason why the film was made was so because the FBI believed that the killer would go to one of the screenings, and then he would eventually slip up and have it be exposed, and they'd never catch him. So that's why they agreed to do the filming, which is also really, it adds again to the realism, because if you've just watched this film, it sounds like he could be in that screening room with them right then and there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for us, we've watched it, through modern media, but we didn't see it in a screening. But I imagine we would have had that sort of feeling. And it was, yeah, it's a really, really well thought out movie. It didn't do well successfully. Like, I don't think in terms of like gross, it probably didn't do that well. It was probably more of a sleeper hit. But I would say it's still one of the strongest found footage films, and the most underrated too. Because if you look at the ratings, like it gets like 6 out of 10. Some even giving it like 4 out of 10, which I think is ludicrous. Personally, I think it deserves much more than that. In fact, it's probably deserving of a higher rating more than some of the more modern found footage films that people seem to like. So yeah, I don't think I can, and yeah, I don't think I can say much else on that. I really, really recommend you watch the Poughkeepsie tapes. Honestly, it's a really fantastic use of the found footage genre, and it probably had one of the more interesting killers that I've seen in a horror film in altogether. To be honest.
Yeah.
There was probably more.
I think also, interestingly enough, is the source material from what Edward Carver's based on, because he's based on a kind of a combination of Leonard Lake and Charles and then you've also got the actual Poughkeepsie killer, who was, let me tell you now, before I forget, Kendall Francois.
Oh yeah, I've briefly read about that as well. Yeah, the murders of serial killer Poughkeepsie as well. Yeah, so there's probably if you want to look into that, that should all be on the Internet Movie Database page as well. There's a lot of trivia and stuff like that I'm sure you'll be interested to divulge in. We're just going to be talking about the film and what our personal opinions of it is, like just like with any other subject matter. But we did talk a fair bit about the Poughkeepsie Tape, to be honest, because there is a lot to talk about, and it's just a really, really good movie. But the next movie,
and we're now running out of time for Lake Mungo.
No. Like it'll be fine. To be honest, there's not much to say, but it's still good what I'm going to say, if that makes sense. So, okay. So hang on a second. Let me just double check. Oh, my apologies. So Lake Mungo wasn't made in 2000. I think in 2007, as long as anything. This is just shortly a year after. So in 2008. This is. Let me just double check before I say anything stupid. Yeah, it's an Australian film. It's just making sure. Directed by Joel Anderson. Now, this film is probably not prominently known, but it's very highly rated in several reviews. Now, this film is another documentary, or a mockumentary style, whatever, and has found footage in it as well. So the story is a 16-year-old girl by the name of Alice Palmer, which I believe may allude to Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks, because there's a lot of Twin Peaks references in that, which I'll get into later. So Alice Palmer was with a family in RHETT, I believe that's how you say in Australia. Any Australians listening, sorry if I got that wrong. She drowned while she was swimming with her family, and basically the whole film revolves around their grievance over the death of their daughter. And she had a brother who basically sets up cameras around the house because they believe there's like paranormal activities going on in relation to his sister. And as time goes on, so the majority of the film is basically about kind of getting over the death of the sister, whilst there's also some supernatural elements as well. But what was really fascinating about this film, so as I mentioned before, minimalism seems to work really well in found footage. This film is 99% interviews, and that's it. That's all it is. So Joe Anderson, I think when he wrote the film, what he intended for Lake Mungo required a larger budget. So what he decided to do is to switch it around and do a low budget documentary style story. And again, the actors not very well known. They had to improvise on the spot whilst being filmed for the interview. So they had to act like, a family that was actually going through a grievance of, one of their children's deaths. And what was also really interesting is the use of technology to kind of, because there's a lot of like home movies that's being shown as well, so to kind of capture the memories of Alice Palmer and things like that. Yeah, so there is little to no there's no gore in this at all, and this film is just as scary as the Poughkeepsie tapes, without the level of violence, the level of gore, the level of blood. It's terrifying, and it's just interviews. That's all it is. It's really, really bizarre, and so there's a lot of use of found footage in this film. I think one of the darker things about this is, as they're going through the grievance and as they think they're seeing paranormal activities of their daughter, they start to discover more about her. So again, this film, although shows no level of violence in any way, it does touch on a lot of very strong themes. And I'll give you an example. So for example, the teenage brother, Matthew, set up cameras around the house because they saw what they thought was basically paranormal activity of Alice haunting the house. So it turns out that he actually set it all up, and he wore like Alice's jacket, for example, in like photos and stuff like that. So it made it look like it was her. It was just to give his parents closure so they can move on. But what they find out during one of the recordings was there was a guy in Alice's room, and they discovered it was the next door neighbour which Alice used to babysit their children. And the next day, they go into that bedroom, and basically there's like a hidden compartment in the room which the mother had a key for. They find a diary and a videotape, and on that videotape it's a tape with her, the neighbour, and his wife having intercourse. So it's basically a sex tape. So she died at 16 years old. So she was younger than that when that tape was made. So that shows like how, this is why I said earlier, like she has like Lauren Palmer sort of vibes. She died young, and it turns out she had like a double life. It's pretty strong. You see some of that tape like just for like 20 seconds. It's pretty hardcore. It turns out like she had a boyfriend as well, and he had no idea about it. And what's really weird is they had like home movies of that neighbour's garden, like doing a barbecue, and she's like talking to him like just casually. which made it even more haunting considering what went on. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's pretty grim. So not only did has she died, but during the course of trying to get over it, to overcome the grief of the daughter's death, they find out more about her than they thought they would know. To be honest, that scene, fuck, it kills me, man. It really, really does. Like, it's so strange. Like, they mention, so it's never explained whether it was consensual or not.
Mm.
Because so we only see 20 seconds, so there's obviously going to be more of that footage. Um, but a lot of the sounds that she made didn't sound like it was consensual. But in
Yeah.
other scenes, you can see her, and it looks like she's flirting with the neighbor, and this might have been going on for some time. But but a lot of people theorized as well that this that like they were complicit in the murder because I guess like this is probably one of the things that may have led to a death in a way. I think it's just because of the guilt, and there's such a large secret as well for a young girl to hold. Like I mean, for any age to do something like that, and it's it might like to have that kind of weighing on you. I wouldn't know how that feels, obviously, but to have a 16-year-old girl who was actually younger theoretically when that tape was made, you know. And the problem is, there's no. I mean, in a way, like a lot of people thought it was kind of gratuitous and vile that the director did it because it really has no other. It doesn't tie in with the film later on. It's just a tape that was found. But a lot of people have
Mm.
said that that could also like that could have led to a death because of the guilt that she was feeling, and also um, that and yeah. So yeah, it's really hard to talk about, but yeah, that's probably one of the hardest things to get through, and it's only 20 seconds of tape in the film as well.
Yeah.
It's so impactful, like I said, it's a really hard film to get through. Like I'll be on that point, but the scariest bit of the film is what they find out later on is Alice's boyfriend after the whole tape's been revealed that he had like film footage on his phone of Lake
Yeah.
Mungo, which is what the film is called, and in it you can see Alice is like burying something at the base of the tree. So what
Yeah.
they did is the family went out there to the exact tree, found it, dug up the bag, and it was all of her possessions, her mobile phone, her like a bracelet or something, like basically things that she treasures. She put in a plastic bag and just buried it. And what happened was on the footage on the phone, she was walking along the lake shore, and she saw like a figure approaching her from the water. And as it gets closer, it turns out to be like herself. And not
Mm.
only that, she was bloated and disfigured, and she looked just like how Alice looked when her body was found. So
Yeah.
basically, she saw her own dead body like approaching her. And even though, like, when I first saw that, I saw the figure coming, but because these films like this was made in like the mid 2000s, so the quality was for shit, so you couldn't see clearly. It wasn't until she approached that you saw there was something wrong with her, and it turns out it was her. It was like a doppelganger just approaching her, and you think, Jesus, oh, it was
Yeah.
horrible, and then you can see her like running away. So from that footage, we kind of see that that she knew she was going to die, and burying her items was kind of like, I don't know, just burying like her treasures like before she goes, and that makes it even more sad that she knew for a while, like she saw her own death and she knew it was going to happen, and there was nothing she could have done about it, you know. And a lot of people theorize like the discovery of that tape and things like that. Um, it was her way of just showing like who she was as a person to the family, because she couldn't do it in real life. It's just so she could move on, you know. And whilst this film isn't necessarily scary as a horror, it defines grief, really. I mean, the whole point of the film is an exploration of grief. That's what the director said. And not just the family, but the grief that Alice Palmer went through. Like I said, she went through a very difficult situation, which she couldn't tell anyone. She's, she saw she saw herself die. Basically, she saw her own dead body. She was probably going a lot of grief before it actually happened, and then it was up to the family to help her move on. And although this film didn't really do that well, and it's probably kind of under the radar for a lot of people who loved like the found footage sort of thing, for me this is just as strong as the Blair Witch Project, just as strong as the Poughkeepsie tapes in its an entirely own way. It's just, it's getting really hard to talk about this film now.
It sounds very very haunting.
Yeah.
In what you're saying.
That's
in how it's kind of dealt with, and grief in particular, and then also maybe her own mindset going forwards with this as well is very I don't want to say familiar, but I feel like it's something that a lot of people from difficult situations might relate to, which makes this movie a lot more impactful.
Yeah.
Especially looking at her behaviors prior to her death.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go into that because that is a whole other kettle of fish.
I mean,
and
I will say this:
it's a psychological side we're not really qualified to talk.
No, but I will say this: like you said, it could relate to a lot of people. It's the same with Laura Palmer and Twin Peaks. It turned out a lot of women who were abused in their life and had troubles with those sort of things actually approached the actress about it and said that like Laura Palmer really spoke to them. Although Alice Palmer wasn't as popular of a character as Laura Palmer was, I'm sure like a lot of people saw that and really understood. To have that immense guilt of what you did, although again there wasn't enough footage to say like how deeply involved she was in those things happening, but it's still pretty I could just imagine it's very hard to get through.
That's more than likely why.
Yeah.
Why it leaves such a haunting imprint on people. And even if it hasn't grossed as highly in box offices as the other movies, or is as widely known, I think there's still a lasting impression. And even, like I said earlier, I haven't seen Lake Mungo, but hearing you speak about it, it's definitely made a lasting impression on you. And just from what you've said alone, there's a lasting impression, and I have a definite idea on what I think this movie is about.
Yeah, it's definitely. I would still recommend watching it because I think it makes you feel things that most horror films don't. And like I said, it's all interviews as well. The majority of it's all interviews, and you wouldn't like with most documentaries like it's sometimes documentaries are hit and miss, especially because there's so many documentaries nowadays. Like Netflix probably puts one out every other day, so it's not always gripping.
Yeah.
But yeah, this will speak to you, Lake Mungo, um, and kind of the reason why I want to do podcasts like this is to shed a light on these sort of things, you know.
Yeah. And kind of the important messages potentially behind these kind of things as well.
Yeah, because like I said, some of these films are under like Poughkeepsie Tapes. I don't think was that popular, nor is this, but they're fantastic films. They're not the same height as the Blair Witch Project, but it just shows. If you just look a little bit deeper into something, there's some real treasures there. You know, just really quickly as well, because I just kind of want to wrap that up. It's getting a bit too hard to talk about now.
That's of course, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but there's just a few follow-ups. I mean, like I said, we're going to do another part of this one day, like in the future, because there are a million films that have been made under this in recent years. For example, Japan made their own version of Paranormal Activity, which I didn't realize until a few days ago. I really need to find a way to watch that and see how they did that. But a good these are just honorary mentions and something we may look into in the future. I recommend Troll Hunter as well. It's not really a horror; it's another monster film like Cloverfield, but that movie is absolutely fantastic. It's almost like a mythical sort of like found footage thing. VHS is another really good shout. So that's actually an anthology found footage series consisting of various horror directors who made their own tapes, so to speak, and they're kind of spliced into an overall storyline. That's something I would like to look up as well, and I think apparently, according to this timeline, the Human Centipede Part 2 has some found footage. I can't remember that movie at all, and for good reasons. But yeah, apparently that's got some found footage in that. You can watch that if you want. I mean, the Human Centipede is just, for me, it's kind of one of those weird ones. It's like a horrifying novelty film, in a way. Like, it's a creepy.
I'm gonna be honest. If you ever ask me to watch the Human Centipede, I will bow out immediately.
Yeah, that film is creepy, but it's also kind of silly. If that makes it so, like I said, it's like a horror novelty. So it has moments of being generally scary, and other moments where it's just laughable. But yeah, I can't think of any other films at the moment that I really recognise and would shout out. But like I said, we'll follow this up in the future. I think the next part we're going to be discussing manga, like the Japanese comics, basically.
Yes, we're going to be looking at manga and webtoons and their horror counterparts.
Yes,
and then
so
I think after that it's on to anime, or are we doing that later?
We could be doing that. Yeah, that could be its own thing. So there's loads. We're already thinking so far
so
ahead. Yeah, I'm already looking forward to the next part now that we just talked about it. But yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed the. I would say kind of more. It was kind of more intimate these last few episodes. I think it's just because of how personal they were to me, like these films, and I think so. It's got these were very intimate for me personally. So hopefully, you relate to that in some way, or not in a way that you relate to the films or what happened in them. That would be horrible. But you get what I'm saying. But we'll leave it at that. We just did 2 hours straight recording, so I think I need that rat race now more than ever.
Yes.
So if you need a laugh, guys, these are pretty bleak episodes. Go watch Rat Race. It will cure you almost immediately. And then just look forward to the next one, which shouldn't be as grim. but it will still be thrilling in a way that it will haunt you for days. But yep, that's everything. Is there any last words you'd like to add there? Lee?
No, I think you've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think we've covered everything.
Thank you.
Until next week, guys.
You take care now, all right?
You too.
See you later. Oh, yeah. Watch Rat Race. This concludes the digital archiving of both cassettes. David Cooper, signing off. God damn it. I should really get these things up. Man. What the fuck? What was that? Oh, just what I need on this fucking night. Ugh.
Statistics show ordinary videotape can destroy your VCR's performance in just a few years. The same statistics show Maxell can help your VCR keep performing for up to 20 years. So you've got a choice. A new videotape now, or a new VCR.
From our house to your house, the Warehouse is entertainment.